we're going to talk about the perceptions of others in social situations. And we're going to start with what actually is how we think about this meme, this kind of thinking. So, what is this kind of thinking? Well, we always try to use causal attribution when talking to others. And this is the process of trying to determine the cause of someone else's behaviors. And the goal of doing this is to learn about who they are and what their personality is. So we're trying to attribute their behaviors to their personality. And this leads to a cognitive bias called the fundamental attribution error. And I remember when I was in Gen Psych, this was my favorite thing that I learned. This changed my whole concept about how I saw situations, how I saw other people. This is huge. The fundamental attribution error states we tend to attribute other people's behavior more towards their personality, where we attribute our own behavior more to the situation. So a really good example of this is when someone cuts you off. You're driving and a car turns out in front of you and you get really mad, right? Like, that's a very normal reaction. You get mad when someone cuts you off. And you probably think, oh, this person is such an ass, or what a jerk. But have you ever cut someone off? Probably. And you probably thought, whoops, my bad, sorry, didn't see you there. Or maybe you were in a town that you weren't familiar with, and so you didn't really know where you were going, so you were not driving well because you weren't familiar with the area. And so you were attributing it to your situation, whereas when someone else cuts you off, you think that they're just a jerk or stupid. Whereas it could be their situation too. They could have something like this going on in their car. They could be a mom with two kids fighting in the back seat. They could be just very distracted by that. Or maybe they're from out of town and they don't know where they're going. So they are like, oh, that's where I need to turn. Gotta go now. Boom. And cut you off. And we can even extend this to our views of homeless people. A lot of people see homeless people and think that they're lazy. We attribute their homelessness to who they are as a person. It's their personality. Whereas it could have just been what life dealt them. It could have been their situation. A lot of homeless people really had bad luck. Where I went to undergrad, where I got my bachelor's degree, there was a decent amount of homeless people, and the reason for that was that there was an old mental institution that shut down, and instead of transferring their patients to a different institution, they just let them out. They just let their patients out. And so all of these patients had nowhere to go, and they were very mentally ill, so they did not know how to function in society. They needed help. So they became homeless. They did not know what to do with themselves. They had no funds. They had no money. it was their specific situation that caused them to be homeless. It wasn't their fault. It wasn't because they were lazy. So, we always try to figure out our own social identity. And we always try to figure out other people's social identity as well. So, our social identity is recognizing our own qualities as an individual and fitting them into a social context. So, I fit in with this group. Oh, you're like me, we should be friends. Things like that. I'm that kind of person. I identify with that type of people. And it's also the positive emotions we experience by being a member of a group. We all try to find a group because we all want to belong. We all want to have a group of friends. We want to have a group that we feel like we belong to. However, this stems from something that can be problematic, and this is called in-groups versus out-groups. We naturally group people. We have our own group, and then other people have their group. So we include our group. We have our group, but then we exclude other people from that group. And this is also called an us versus them mentality. So the in-group is the group that you identify with. And the out-group is them. Anyone else that does not qualify for the group you identify with. So let's say that you identify as let's say a hipster that likes flannels and Doc Martens and big glasses and indie music. And you have your friends that like the same things. And then people who don't like those things are the out group. Your friends are the in group, the people like you. And if you meet someone that looks similar to you, that also has a flannel on, Doc Martens on, big glasses on, you would be like, oh, they're a hipster too. They're part of my group. They're cool. So, the cool thing about this, though, is that in-groups and out-groups can be problematic, but you can break them down because we can all relate to somebody somehow. Like, we all are a member of so many different groups. We can all identify with so many different groups that we can make an in-group for any person we meet. And this video is really cool about showing you how that can be done. It's from Denmark, by the way.
It's easy to put people in boxes. There's us, and there's them. The high earners, and those just getting by. Those we trust, and those we try to avoid. There's the new Danes, and those who've always been here. The people from the countryside, and those who've never seen a cow. The religious, and the self-confident. There are those we share something with, and those we don't share anything with.
Velkommen. Jeg kommer til at stille jer nogle spørgsmål i dag. Nogle af dem kan godt være lidt personlige, men jeg håber, I vil svare ærligt på dem. Hvem herinde i rummet var klassens klovn? Hvem er bonusforældre?
And then suddenly, there's us. We who believe in life after death. We who've seen UFOs. And all of us who love to dance. We who've been bullied. And we who've bullied others. And then there's us, the lucky ones who've had sex this past week. We who are broken-hearted. We who are madly in love. We who feel lonely. We who are bisexual. And we who acknowledge the courage of others. We who have found the meaning of life. And we who have saved lives. And then there's all of us who just love Denmark. So maybe there's more that brings us together than we think. TV2 Denmark. All that we share.
Aw, that's so cool. I just love that video because it shows, at first, they all seem so different. But then, when you break it down, there's so many different things that they have in common. But unfortunately, if you just look at the in-groups and out-groups and the artificial difference of people, this leads to prejudice. And the in-group and out-group mentality is really what leads to the prejudice of the out-groups. You start to prejudge the people that you don't identify with, the people outside of your group. And this can become a problem. So prejudice is defined as an unjustified and a usually negative attitude towards a person just because of their group membership, just because of what group they're in, just because they're not in your group. And this prejudice is an attitude, but remember, attitudes can heavily influence behavior. So prejudice leads to discrimination. And discrimination is behaviors that are made towards a specific person or a group of people based on their membership of what group they're in, based on the fact that they're not in your group. And once again, these behaviors are usually negative. So if you're thinking that you have felt this in-group, out-group thing, it's okay, because it's normal to make these groups. It is a human trait to group people. But you need to be aware that you're doing it and be careful not to make prejudice of groups, and definitely try not to discriminate against groups. So this is really interesting because this was shown in a doll study that prejudice and discriminations bleed into daily life without our awareness even. And this affects everyone, not just the in-group, not just the people that are prejudiced already against the people that they're prejudiced towards. It also affects the out-group that the prejudice is aimed towards. It affects them too. And this was shown by a study by Kenneth and Mamie Phipps Clark. What they did is they showed white and black children 2 dolls. One doll was white and one was black. Oh, I should also mention that this study was used in the Brown versus Board of Education trial to desegregate schools. So this is pretty awesome. So one doll was white, one doll was black. They had both black and white children. So they asked the children to show them which doll they would like to play with, which doll was the good doll, and which doll was the bad doll. Both white and black children chose the white doll to play with and as the good doll. And both white and black children chose the bad doll to play with as the bad doll. That is insane. That it bled into not just the prejudice of white children, but the black children also showed the prejudice. And this is a 2007 study that tried to recreate it. They only used black children, but it still is pretty effective.
In Brown versus Board of Education, the famous case that desegregated schools in the 1950s, Dr. Kenneth Clark conducted a doll test with black children. He asked them to choose between a black doll and a white doll. In most instances, the majority of the children preferred the white doll. I decided to reconduct this test as Dr. Clark did to see how we've progressed since then. Can you show me the doll that you like best or that you'd like to play with? Show me the doll that is the nice doll. And why is that the nice doll? White. And can you show me the doll that looks bad? Okay. And can you give, and why does that look bad? Because it's black. And why do you think that's a nice doll? Because she's white. And can you give me the doll that looks like you? 15 out of the 21 children preferred the white doll.
It was so heartbreaking. Like, oh, especially when they ask which doll looks like you. Ugh, yeah. So, what's worse about this is that these prejudices can even turn into self-fulfilling prophecies. And what a self-fulfilling prophecy is when our expectations of other people to have certain characteristics or behave a certain way lead us to treat them a certain way, and that makes those beliefs come true. So, and a really good example of this, I know you guys don't watch this show, but is from Westworld. It's such a good show, by the way. Highly recommend. It is kind of gory and there's a lot of nudity and stuff, but super good. Weird plug for Westworld aside. The example from this show is about a character named James Delos and his son Logan. So Logan, the son, has had a bit of trouble. He's had some issues. and he used drugs to cope and became addicted to these drugs. And he went to his dad asking for help. He went to his dad asking for money, for help, and his dad told him to get clean and come back. He did get clean. He came back, and his dad told him it wouldn't last. So he didn't help him. He said, "Oh, but yeah, you're clean now, but it's not going to last, so I'm not going to help you." That is treating him a certain way. That's expecting him to relapse, which leads him, and therefore you treat him like he's going to and refuse to help him, which leads him to relapse because he doesn't have any support. And so he comes back once again, and he's using again. And they have this talk. And that's the last time they see each other because Logan overdoses. There's also studies that have shown this. Rosenthal and Jacobson looked at teachers and their expectations of students. So students were given an IQ test, and the teachers were not told the scores at all. So they were actually given real IQ tests. The researchers knew their IQs, but the teachers did not. And then the experimenters randomly selected some students as intellectual boomers. So this was not based on their IQ scores. This was just random selection. And then they told the teachers the list of intellectual boomers. They're like, this list of kids we think are intellectual boomers based on the IQ test, which is a lie. So what happened is the teachers gave more time to the intellectual boomers over the school year, and their IQs rose more than other students. They actually learned more and became more intelligent because the teachers had the expectation that they were more intelligent, even though it was random. They weren't any different than any of the other kids. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. And these biases of prejudice, of self-fulfilling prophecies, of expectations, just attitudes, how we feel about certain things, unfortunately, we might think that we don't have a prejudice or we don't have a bad attitude towards something, but we might have it secretly and not know it. And it might affect our behaviors. So what implicit bias is stereotypes and prejudice that are ingrained into us, and we're not aware of them. They affect our behaviors, decisions, and understanding unconsciously. How do we know this exists if it's unconscious? That's a great question, Alicia. I'm glad you asked. Can we measure this? Yeah, if it's unconscious, that was the whole thing about Freud, right? If it's unconscious, we can't measure it, right? Well, they actually found a way to measure implicit bias. And this is how they measure it. So this is an implicit bias test for white versus black people, or African American versus European American, technically. So what they start with is they start you off with, okay, they're going to show you words in the center here, and you need to click a button if it's good, or click a different button if it's bad. So this word is awful, so you need to click the button for bad. Then once you finish that phase, you go to, okay, there's going to be a face here, and you need to figure out if it's African American or if it's European American. And then you need to click which one it is. So this is an African American face, you would click African American. Then, once you've done both of these, they put them together. But what happens in the center is only one of them. So it's either a good or bad word, or an African American or European American face. And you're supposed to do this as fast as you can. And how they measure it is by how many errors you make. So what happens is if you do have, and then what they do is they flip it. So then now the African American is paired with bad, European Americans paired with good, but now European Americans paired with bad, African Americans paired with good. And they see if you make, which one do you make more errors on? Do you make more errors when African Americans paired with bad or European Americans paired with bad? And same with good. And that reveals your implicit bias, because you're supposed to do it as fast as you can while being as accurate as you can be. And this is really, I've actually taken a few of these tests and they're really eye-opening. They're really interesting. The kind of surprising results. But the good news is, once we're aware of our biases, we can work to overcome them. They are learned. Even if they're unconscious, they are learned. Prejudices are learned. And we can unlearn them. We can work to overcome them.